The alien girl's pets were dying of thirst. The human's final act shocked everyone. The desert air was dry and sharp. 2 suns burned high in the sky, turning the ground into a sheet of fire. Wind carried the taste of sand into every breath. The market of Zurin City was crowded, full of alien traders shouting prices and waving goods among the noise. A young alien girl named Leora moved through the crowd. Her arms held a small metal cage. Inside were 3 tiny creatures with soft, golden fur and long ears that twitched weakly. Their eyes were half closed, and their breathing was slow. They were dying of thirst. Leora's face was pale, and her lips were dry. Her own throat burned from lack of water. But she didn't care about herself. Her only thought was to save her pets. These creatures were called Selvi, rare desert companions loved by her people. For centuries, they were loyal, gentle, and could sense danger before it came. But without water, even the strongest Selvi would not last long. Leora had been walking for hours, asking every merchant for help. Each time, she was met with the same answer, a shake of the head or a cold laugh. Water was too precious to waste on animals. In the desert, water was life. Leora knew that. But these were not just animals to her. They were her friends, her family. The storm last night had destroyed her caravan's water supply. The barrels had tipped over and spilled into the sand. By morning, nothing was left but damp earth. Her caravan master told her to leave the pets behind. He said they were already as good as dead. But she could not. She carried them through the storm, holding them close. Now she stood in the middle of the market, begging strangers for help. But no one listened. They turned away, pretending not to hear. Some even muttered insults under their breath. "Foolish girl," one trader said, "wasting your strength on beasts." Leora felt her hands trembling as she looked down at the cage. One Selvi gave a weak whimper, its tongue dry and cracked. She bit her lip, trying not to cry. If she cried, she would lose even more water from her body. That was when she noticed someone standing a few steps away. A tall figure, broad-shouldered, with a worn leather jacket and a dust-covered pack. He was human. Leora had heard of humans before, travelers from far-off worlds who sometimes crossed the desert for trade. This one had a calm, steady gaze. He was watching her, not with mockery, but with something else, concern. He stepped closer, and the crowd seemed to notice him. Whispers passed between the merchants. Some frowned, others laughed. Humans were rare here, and most locals thought them strange. He stopped in front of her and looked down at the cage. "They need water," he said softly, his voice carrying over the noise. Leora nodded, clutching the cage tighter. "They won't live another hour," she whispered. He shifted the pack from his shoulder and pulled out a small metal canteen. It wasn't large, maybe enough for one person to last a day in the heat. Gasps rose from nearby traders as they realized what he was about to do. The man opened the cap and tilted the canteen. "Wait," a voice called out from the crowd. It was an old merchant with a long gray scarf. "You give that water to animals, you may not live to see tomorrow," the merchant warned. The human looked up but said nothing. His eyes returned to Leora. "Will they live if I give them this?" he asked. Leora swallowed hard. "Yes." "But then that's all I need to know," he said, cutting her off. The market grew silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy in the air. Leora's heart pounded as he knelt down beside her. He held the canteen over the small bowl attached to the cage door. Slowly, he poured. The water sparkled in the sunlight as it filled the bowl. The Selvi smelled it instantly, their ears twitching. They scrambled forward, lapping it up with desperate speed. The sound of their drinking was quick and frantic. A few drops spilled onto the sand and disappeared instantly. Leora's eyes filled with tears she could not hold back, for the first time since the storm. Hope filled her chest. The human watched quietly, his face unreadable. The crowd stared, some shaking their heads, others whispering, "This man is crazy," one said, "or maybe brave," another replied. When the last drop left the canteen, the human closed it and stood up. The Selvi were breathing easier now, their eyes brighter. One of them even licked his hand through the bars. Leora looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Why?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Because someone should," he replied, and in that moment, under the burning suns, something unspoken passed between them. The market noise returned, but Leora barely heard it. The human turned to leave, but already, shadows were moving in the crowd. Not everyone was happy about what he had done. The heat of the market still pressed down like a heavy blanket. But the crowd's whispers followed him as he walked away, each word like a shadow that trailed his steps. Leora hurried after him, the cage held tightly against her chest, her pets now moving with a little more energy, their tongues still damp from the water he had given. She caught up to him near the edge of the bazaar, her voice soft but urgent. "You'll be in danger now," she said. He kept walking, his eyes scanning the street ahead. "Danger from who?" he asked without looking back. She glanced around before answering. "There are people here who see kindness as weakness. They'll think you're an easy mark now." He gave a small laugh, not mocking, but tired. "I've been an easy mark before. It didn't work out for them." His words were calm, but there was a weight in them, a weight that spoke of fights won and scars earned. They moved through the maze of narrow streets, past stalls of woven rugs, metal trinkets, and baskets of dried fruits. Children ran barefoot through the alleys. Merchants argued over prices, and the smell of roasted spices filled the air. But everywhere they went, eyes followed them. Leora noticed two tall men in dark wraps, walking slowly behind, their faces hidden. Her steps quickened. The human noticed too, though he didn't say it. They reached a quieter part of the market, where a crumbling stone wall cast a thin line of shade. Here the sounds of the bazaar were distant. Leora stopped, shifting the cage to one arm, and reached into a small pouch tied to her belt. She pulled out a small piece of cloth, folded neatly. Inside was a single silver token. "This is all I have," she said, holding it out to him. "It's not much, but you gave your water for them, and for me." He looked at the token, but didn't take it. "Keep it," he said. "You'll need it more than I do." Her eyes widened a little. "You don't understand. This is rare here. You could buy food, a place to sleep." But he only shook his head. "I'll find my own way." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint scratching of the Selvi in the cage. One of them had begun to hum softly, a sound Leora knew meant they were feeling safe again. The human glanced down at the creatures and almost smiled. "They seem to like me," he said. She nodded. "They can sense people's hearts. They know who would hurt them and who wouldn't." The two men who had been following stepped into view at the far end of the street, moving closer now, their shadows stretching across the sand. Leora's fingers tightened around the cage. The human didn't change his expression, but his eyes shifted toward a side alley. "Come on," he said, turning. They slipped into the narrow path between buildings, the stone walls so close they brushed their shoulders. The air was cooler here, but heavy with the smell of damp earth. The footsteps followed, slow and steady. Leora's breath quickened. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They want your pack, maybe even the cage." The human's voice stayed steady. "Let them try," he said. But Leora could hear the faint creak of leather as his hand brushed the hilt of something strapped at his side. They reached a dead end, a high wall blocking the way forward. Leora turned, panic rising. The two men stepped into the alley's mouth, blocking the exit, their hands resting on curved blades at their belts. One spoke in a low voice. "Water is worth more than gold here, stranger. You wasted yours, so now you owe us." The human tilted his head slightly. "I don't owe you anything." The man's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll take it." He stepped forward, the other moving to flank him. Leora took a step back, holding the cage close. The Selvi inside hissed, their fur bristling. The human moved so slightly it was hard to see, but suddenly, his stance shifted, the weight of his body grounded, his eyes sharp. "You have one chance to turn around, he said quietly. The words heavy in the still air. The two men laughed. The kind of laugh that came from people who thought they had already won. But the laughter stopped when one of the Selvi let out a sound like a sharp chime, high and piercing. In the same breath, the smallest of the three darted from between the bars. A flash of gold and teeth. It landed on the arm of the nearest man. Biting deep, the man shouted, stumbling back. The human stepped forward in that same moment, one hand gripping the wrist of the second man before he could draw his blade. With a twist and a shove, he sent him crashing into the wall. The Selvi released the first man and leapt back into the cage, as if nothing had happened. The two would-be thieves staggered away, cursing under their breath, disappearing into the maze of streets. Leora stared, her mouth slightly open. They've never done that for anyone but me, she said softly. The human only shrugged. Guess they know who their friends are. His voice was calm, but there was a flicker in his eyes, the kind that comes when someone realizes the trouble is just beginning and not ending. By the time the sun began to sink toward the horizon, the colors of the desert had shifted from bright gold to deep orange. Shadows stretched across the streets of Zarin City, long and sharp. The market was quieter now, though the smell of spices still lingered in the air. Jack, the human, walked beside Leora, toward the edge of the city. The cage in her arms warm from the bodies of the Selvi, nestled inside. They seemed calmer now, but their eyes followed every movement in the streets. The tension from the afternoon still clung to them. Leora had said little since the alley, her thoughts tangled between relief and worry. She knew the men who had tried to rob them would not forget, and neither would others who had been watching. The city remembered kindness almost as quickly as it remembered weakness. They reached a wide open gate that led to the desert beyond. The walls around it were made of thick stone, built to keep out the shifting sands during storms. Jack stopped just before the gate, looking at the expanse. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, glowing in the fading light. Leora hesitated. "You're leaving?" she asked. He glanced at her. "I never planned to stay long." Her fingers gripped the cage tighter. "It's dangerous at night. You should wait until morning." Jack gave a small smile. Danger is everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's dark or light. But his eyes moved to her face, noticing the worry there. "What about you?" he asked. "Will you be safe?" She opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, a deep voice called from behind. Turning, they saw a tall figure in black armor walking toward them. The helmet gleamed faintly under the dim sky. It was the same armored guard who had been watching earlier in the market. His heavy boots left small clouds of dust with each step. "Human." The guard's voice was low, but carried weight. "Your act today has drawn attention. Not all of it good." Jack's expression didn't change. "I guessed as much." The guard's gaze shifted to Leora. "And you, girl? You should know better than to accept help from outsiders here." Leora straightened her back. "If he hadn't helped, the Selvi would be dead. I would be alone, maybe worse." The guard's jaw tightened slightly. "Perhaps," he said, then turned his focus back to Jack. "I will give you advice. Leave now, before you are tested further." Jack tilted his head. "And if I don't?" The guard's eyes narrowed. "Then you'll find this city less forgiving than the desert." With that, the guard turned and walked away, disappearing into the maze of streets, his armor making a faint clinking sound that faded into the distance. Silence settled between them. The gate loomed ahead. Beyond it, the open desert whispered of both freedom and danger. Leora shifted her weight. "If you go, they'll follow you. They'll wait until you're far enough from the city." Jack looked at her for a moment. "You're telling me to stay?" Her voice was steady now. "I'm telling you that you saved lives today. And some people here won't forgive that." He considered her words, his hand resting on the strap of his pack. The wind from the gate carried a faint chill. Now that the suns were lowering, the Selvi made a soft sound from inside the cage, something between a hum and a purr. Jack glanced at them. "They're tougher than they look." Leora smiled faintly. So are you. The decision seemed to settle in his mind. All right, he said. One night her relief was quiet but visible. They turned back toward the inner streets, heading to a part of the city where the walls were lower and the lights dimmer. Fewer merchants worked here, and the air smelled faintly of smoke from cooking fires. They reached a small courtyard where a stone well sat in the center, the water at the bottom glimmering faintly in the last light. Leora set the cage down and pulled up a small bucket, filling a shallow bowl for the Selvi. They drank eagerly. Their small bodies pressed together. Jack crouched nearby, watching. You care for them like they're your family, he said. Leora's voice softened. They are. When my parents were gone, they were all I had. They kept me safe, warned me when danger was near. They've saved me more times than I can count. She hesitated, then added, that's why. I couldn't let them die, even if it meant begging strangers. Jack nodded slowly. Sometimes it takes more strength to keep something alive than to let it go. She looked at him with curiosity, but before she could speak, a sharp sound cut through the quiet, a single metallic clink from the shadows beyond the courtyard. Jack's head turned instantly, his hand brushing the weapon at his side. A figure stepped forward, then another, both cloaked in dark fabric that blended with the night. Their faces hidden, the one in front spoke, his voice oily and amused. The human with the bleeding heart, he said, we've been looking for you. Jack rose to his feet slowly, his stance steady. Then you've found me. Pulse quickened. The Selvi pressed against the bars, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Jack's eyes narrowed. Your mistake, he said quietly. And in the stillness before anything moved, Leora realized something. The real test hadn't even started yet. The two cloaked figures moved slowly into the courtyard, their steps silent on the stone. The air seemed to grow heavier with each step they took. Jack stood still, his eyes watching every movement, his posture relaxed but ready. Leora stayed near the well, clutching the cage as the Selvi shifted inside, their fur bristling in the dim light. One of the men tilted his head, the faint gleam of metal showing under his hood. Word spreads fast here, he said. A human foolish enough to waste water on animals. A human who thinks he can walk these streets without paying the price. His voice carried the slow confidence of someone used to control. Jack said nothing, only adjusted his grip on the strap of his pack. The man took a few steps closer, his partner circling to the side. The smell of sweat and dry leather followed them. Leora's eyes darted between them, her mind racing. She had seen men like this before. They wouldn't just take his things. They would make a point of breaking him. The first man's hand moved toward his belt. The faint scrape of metal sliding free echoed in the courtyard. Jack's gaze flicked briefly to the weapon, then back to the man's eyes. Leave, Jack said, his voice low. Now, the man gave a short laugh. Or what? The answer came without words. Jack stepped forward with sudden speed, his hand catching the man's wrist before the blade could rise. A sharp twist forced the weapon down. The sound of bones straining under pressure made the man hiss in pain. Before the second man could react, a flash of gold leaped from the cage. One of the Selvi landed on his shoulder, claws gripping tight, its teeth snapping near his ear. The man staggered, swatting at it, but the creature moved too fast, darting to his other shoulder, its growl vibrating in the air. Leora opened the cage wider. The other two, Selvi slipping out like shadows, circling low, their ears flat. The first man tried to pull free, but Jack shoved him back, the force sending him stumbling against the stone wall, his blade clattering to the ground. The second man, distracted by the biting and clawing, swung wildly, but one of the Selvi darted between his legs, tripping him. He hit the ground hard, dust rising around him. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Leora's voice cut through the chaos, her hand steady now. These are not pets, they're guardians. The men froze at the word, their eyes widening. Everyone in the desert knew of the guardian Selvi, creatures bred to protect their bonded owner until death, their loyalty unmatched. Jack stepped back, Letting the men struggle to their feet, the Selvi returned to Leora without needing a command. Slipping back into the cage with quiet precision, Jack's voice was calm but hard. Next time, think twice before you follow someone. The men glared but didn't speak, retreating quickly into the shadows, their pride wounded more than their bodies. The courtyard was silent again, except for the soft hum of the Selvi. Leora knelt to check each one, her hands brushing their fur. "They're fine," she said softly. Jack leaned against the well for a moment, catching his breath. The air was cooling now, the desert night creeping in. "They've never done that for a stranger," she added, looking up at him. Jack met her gaze. "Maybe they know I'm not a stranger anymore." There was a faint curve to his mouth, not quite a smile, but something close. Leora's mind replayed the last few moments, the way he had moved, quick and precise. The way the Selvi had trusted him instantly. There was more to this human than a simple traveler. She could feel it, but she didn't ask. Not yet. The sound of boots echoed faintly in the distance, heavier and more measured than the footsteps of thieves. Both of them turned toward the sound. The armored guard emerged from the shadows, his eyes sweeping over the scene. His voice carried a hint of something, not quite respect, but close. "I warned you," he said to Jack. "You stayed." Jack straightened. "I don't leave things unfinished." The guard's gaze flicked to Leora. "He's made enemies now, more than you realize." Leora's chin lifted slightly. "Then he has allies too." The guard studied them for a moment before turning to leave. His parting words low. "The city watches, human, and so does the desert." When the guard was gone, Leora let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Jack glanced at the dark streets around them. "You have somewhere safe to stay?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "Maybe, but not alone." Her eyes moved to the Selvi, then back to him. "And not without you." Jack adjusted his pack, his gaze steady on hers. "Then lead the way," he said, and as they moved through the quiet streets, the city seemed to close in behind them. The feeling in the air was different now, not just danger, but something heavier, something waiting. The streets were quieter now, the air cooler under the light of the twin moons. The shadows stretched long, wrapping around the stone buildings like silent watchers. Leora walked ahead, her steps quick but careful. The Selvi's cage held close. Jack followed, his eyes scanning every alley and rooftop. They moved away from the market district into an older part of the city. Here, the walls were cracked, and the streets narrowed to thin paths of packed sand. Most doors were shut, no lights showed from inside. The only sounds were the soft scrape of their boots and the faint purring hum of the Selvi. Finally, Leora stopped before a low doorway, hidden partly behind a tangle of woven cloth. She pushed it aside and stepped into a small dim room. The air smelled faintly of herbs and dust. Inside there was a simple table, 2 chairs, and a bed covered with a worn blanket. A single lantern flickered on a shelf. "This was my mother's place," she said quietly. "No one comes here anymore." She set the cage down near the bed and unlatched the door. The Selvi stepped out, stretching, their ears twitching as they sniffed the air. Jack stepped inside and closed the door behind him, his back to the wall. For a while, there was silence. Leora poured a little water into a shallow dish for the Selvi. They drank slowly this time, no longer desperate, but still thirsty. Jack sat at the table, removing his jacket and setting it over the chair. He didn't miss the way Leora kept glancing at the window. "You're expecting someone," he said, not as a question. Her hands paused over the water jug. "I'm expecting trouble," she admitted. "Word spreads fast in Zareen. Someone will come looking for you." "Maybe for me." Jack leaned back slightly, his expression calm. "Then we'll be ready." She studied him for a moment, then nodded, moving to a small wooden chest in the corner. She opened it and pulled out a narrow cloth bundle. Inside was a short, curved blade with a handle wrapped in faded leather. "This was my father's," she said, offering it to him. Jack took it, testing the weight. The blade was sharp, despite its age. Before he could speak, one of the Selvi let out a sharp, high-pitched sound. The other two froze, their ears flat. Leora's head snapped toward the window. Her voice dropped. "They hear something." Jack rose from the chair, without a sound, moving toward the window. The street outside was empty, but the air felt different, heavier. A faint scrape came from the roof above, then another. Jack stepped back from the window, his voice low. "We're not alone." The words had barely left his mouth when the door shuddered under a heavy blow. The cloth hanging outside swayed wildly. Another hit followed. This time the wooden frame cracked. Leora grabbed the cage, calling the Selvi back inside. They obeyed instantly. Jack moved to the side of the door, the curved blade in his hand. The door gave way on the third strike, splintering inward. Two figures rushed in, both armed, their faces covered in dark cloth. The first swung at where Jack had been standing, but he was already moving, the blade flashing in the lantern light. He caught the man's arm, twisting hard. The second lunged for Leora, but the cage burst open before he could reach her. The Selvi launched out in a blur. One clamped its jaws on the attacker's wrist, forcing him to drop his weapon. Another darted low, biting at his ankle. The third leaped at his face, claws raking the cloth away to reveal wide, panicked eyes. The man stumbled back, swatting wildly. The first attacker tried to recover, but Jack's knee slammed into his chest, sending him crashing into the wall. The curved blade pressed against his throat. His breath came in short bursts. "Why are you here?" Jack's voice was sharp. The man's eyes flicked to Leora. "The girl. The Guardians. Worth a fortune." Leora's jaw tightened. The Selvi growled in unison, their bodies tense. Jack shoved the man toward the door. "Get out," he said. The man didn't wait to be told twice. Scrambling outside, his partner followed, limping, the sound of their footsteps fading quickly into the night. Silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful. The room felt smaller now, the shadows heavier. Leora closed the door, her hands trembling slightly. "They know," she said softly. "They know what the Selvi are." Jack set the blade down on the table. "Then it won't stop here." One of the Selvi climbed onto Jack's shoulder, resting there as if it had always belonged. Leora saw the way it looked at him, the same way it looked at her, and she realized something. "They've accepted you," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Jack didn't answer, but his hand reached up to steady the small creature. Outside, somewhere in the dark, a slow, deliberate knock echoed on the walls of the alley. Once, twice, 3 times, and Leora's eyes widened. "That's not them," she said, her voice low. "That's worse." The knock came again, slow and heavy, as if the one outside already knew there would be no refusal. The sound rolled through the small room like distant thunder. Jack moved to stand between the door and Leora, his hand resting lightly on the curved blade. The Selvi pressed close to Leora's legs, their fur raised, their low growls vibrating. In the air, Leora's voice was a whisper, almost lost under the sound of her own breathing. "That's not a thief, not a street gang." Jack's eyes stayed on the door. "Then, who is it?" Her gaze shifted down for a moment. "The kind of people you don't want knowing your name." The knock came a third time, then stopped. Silence hung for a few long heartbeats. Then, a voice called from outside. Deep and measured. "Leora, daughter of 7. Open the door." Her breath caught. Jack's head turned slightly toward her. "You know them?" She shook her head quickly. "I know of them," she said. "Desert brokers, the ones who trade in rare lives." Before Jack could answer, the door creaked open on its own, slow and deliberate. A tall alien figure stepped inside, draped in long robes the color of midnight sand. His eyes were bright silver, catching the flicker of the lantern light. Behind him stood 2 others, silent and unmoving. "You have something of ours," the robed figure said, his gaze sliding past Jack to the Selvi. The smallest of them hissed. The alien smiled faintly. "Guardians, fully bonded, and to a human no less." Jack stepped forward slightly, his body blocking the view. "They're not yours," he said. The alien's eyes studied him. "Everything rare becomes someone's property here," he said calmly. "We simply decide who deserves to keep it." His hand moved slowly into his sleeve, producing a small metal sphere, no larger than a fruit, the faint hum coming from it made the Selvi shift uneasily. Leora's voice trembled. "That's a control beacon." The alien smiled. "Clever girl. It calls guardians from any distance. They will follow the signal, no matter their bond." The smallest Selvi took a step forward, its ears flat. Jack's hand moved to his belt, but the alien only tilted his head. "Fight me, and you risk them running straight into my arms." The tension in the room grew thick. The alien took one slow step forward. "Here is my offer," he said. "Leave the creatures, and I will let you both walk away. Refuse, and you will leave alone." Jack's eyes narrowed. His voice was low. "You're forgetting one thing." The alien's smile didn't fade. "And what is that?" "They don't belong to you," Jack said, "and they never will." His hand moved faster than the eye could follow, a small throwing blade leaving his fingers. The metal flashed once in the lantern light before striking the beacon. Sparks flared as it shattered. The hum stopped instantly. The Selvi's growls deepened, their bodies tense and ready. The alien's smile vanished, his voice sharpened. "You've made a mistake, human." His two guards stepped forward, blades drawn. Jack's body shifted into a fighter's stance, but before they could close the distance, the Selvi moved. The largest leaped straight for the nearest guard, knocking him back into the doorframe, claws tearing at his arm. The second darted low, slamming into the legs of the other guard, sending him crashing to the floor. The smallest went for the robed figure, its teeth snapping at the fabric of his sleeve. The alien shouted something in a language neither Jack nor Leora knew. The two guards scrambled to push back, but the guardians were relentless. Jack took the opening, stepping forward with a sharp strike to the first guard's jaw. The man crumpled. The second tried to rise, but found Jack's blade at his throat. The robed alien backed toward the door, his silver eyes colder now. "This is not over," he said, his voice like a promise. Then he turned and was gone into the night. The remaining guards stumbled after him, leaving the doorway empty. Leora sank to her knees, wrapping her arms around the Selvi. As they returned to her side, Jack closed the door firmly, sliding the bolt into place. The quiet that followed felt heavier than before. "They won't stop," she said, her voice small. "Not until they have them." Jack crouched beside her. "Then they'll have to go through me." The smallest Selvi climbed onto Jack's shoulder again, curling there as if it had done so 100 times, its eyes half closed. Leora saw it and felt a strange calm, but also a deeper fear, because she knew now, the fight for the Guardians had only just begun. The night was still, but the air outside the small house carried a sense of movement. The desert wind whispered through the alleys, carrying the faint sound of distant footsteps. Jack stood near the door, his hand resting on the curved blade. The Selvi were restless, pacing in small circles near Leora's feet. "They're regrouping," Leora said quietly, her eyes on the window. "They won't try again here. They'll wait until we're outside the city." Jack's voice was steady. "Then we leave before they're ready." She looked at him with doubt. "There's no safe road. Every path is watched." He gave a small shrug. "Good. It means we don't have to guess where they'll be." They moved quickly, gathering what little they had. Leora wrapped the Selvi in a wide cloth to keep them hidden. Jack took the lead, opening the door slowly. The street outside was empty under the pale glow of the moons. The only sound was the distant call of a night bird. They slipped through narrow back lanes, avoiding the main roads. The old stones beneath their boots were cool. The air carried the smell of dry earth. For a while, the city seemed asleep, but Jack could feel the eyes watching from the shadows. When they reached the south gate, 2 guards in dark armor stepped into their path. Not city guards, the same kind of hired muscle that had followed them before. One lifted a hand, "Going somewhere." Jack didn't stop walking. Far from here, the man's smile was thin. Not without leaving what you carry, before the man could take another step. A low growl came from under Leora's cloak. The sound made the guards hesitate. Jack used the moment, moving forward with sudden speed, his shoulder slamming into the first guard's chest. The man stumbled back. Wind knocked from him. The second guard drew a short blade. But the Selvi burst free from the cloth. They moved like lightning, one leaping to bite at the guard's wrist, another darting between his legs, tripping him. The smallest landed on his shoulder, claws digging in until his blade clattered to the ground. The fight ended as quickly as it began, the two men retreating into the shadows, clutching their wounds. Jack and Leora didn't wait. They slipped through the gate into the open desert, the night air cooler now, stars spread wide above them. Their footsteps muffled on the sand. For a time, the only sound was the wind, but then, far behind, the faint thunder of many feet began to rise. "They're coming," Leora said, her voice tight. Jack glanced back. The movement on the horizon was a dark wave, more than a dozen figures, moving fast. "They'll catch us before dawn if we stay on the ground," she said, her eyes scanning the dunes. Then she pointed toward a rise in the sand. "There's an old watchtower ahead. If we reach it," they ran, the Selvi keeping pace easily, their bodies low to the ground, the sound of pursuit growing louder. Jack felt the burn in his lungs, but didn't slow. The tower rose out of the sand like a jagged tooth, its stones weathered and broken. They reached it just as the first shouts echoed across the dunes. Inside, the air was cooler, the floor littered with old stone and broken wood. Jack pulled Leora toward a narrow staircase winding upward. They climbed quickly, the Selvi bounding ahead. At the top, the desert spread in every direction, the approaching figures now clear under the moonlight. "They're too many," Leora said, her voice shaking. Jack looked at her, then at the Selvi. "Not if they don't want to get close." He knelt beside the smallest Selvi, speaking softly. "Do what you did before, but bigger." The creature's ears twitched, as if understanding. The first of their pursuers reached the base of the tower, shouting threats. The Selvi stepped forward to the edge, their fur bristling. Then they let out a sound unlike anything Leora had heard, a piercing, layered cry that echoed across the desert. The sound carried power. The pursuers slowed, some covering their ears, others stumbling back. Then the ground seemed to shift, a ripple moving through the sand, as if answering the call. Dark shapes rose in the distance, wild guardian packs, drawn by the cry, dozens of them, their eyes glinting in the moonlight. The attackers froze, the wild guardians circling them. In the sand, low growls rolling through the night. Jack stood at the edge of the tower, his voice carrying, "Go home, or you won't make it back." The leader hesitated only a moment before signaling retreat, the wave of pursuers breaking apart and fleeing into the dark. The wild guardians did not follow far. Fading back into the dunes, silence returned, the wind cool against their faces. Leora turned to Jack, her eyes wide. "No one calls wild guardians. No one." He smiled faintly. "Guess no one told them that." The smallest Selvi leaped to his shoulder again, curling there as if it had always been its place. By the time dawn touched the horizon, the city was far behind them. The desert stretched wide and open. Leora walked beside him, the guardians at their feet, and though they had lost much, she knew one thing: no one in Zirin would ever forget the human who gave his water to save dying creatures, and in doing so, changed everything.